The gray January dawn crept over the Alsatian village of Herrlisheim, wrapped in cold mist and silence. On that morning in 1945, 2 Panther tanks rolled into town under the command of a young SS officer, Erwin Bachmann, into a scene that would become legend. They faced scores of American Shermans. How could so few prevail against so many? What decisions and hazards shaped that encounter? In frozen streets under low visibility, with the Rhineland warfront trembling nearby, this clash would become one of the most remarkable duels of the West Front's final months. If you're interested in stories like this, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. There are many more gripping tales from history ahead. By the beginning of 1945, the Western Front was on the edge of collapse for Germany. The Allies were pressing toward the Rhine, while German command sought desperate counterblows to delay the inevitable. In Alsace, Hitler's last major offensive in the West was launched, Operation Nordwind. Its goal, to punch through the Allied lines in northeastern France, recapture key positions, and relieve pressure on the battered forces retreating from the Ardennes. Herrlisheim, a modest village on the banks of the Zorn River, soon became one of the focal points of this effort. The 12th U.S. Armored Division, nicknamed the Hellcats, had been ordered to hold the line and contain German forces near Gamsheim. Their task was to secure the villages along the river and block any attempt to establish a crossing. On the German side stood the 10th SS Panzer Division, Frundsberg. Among its officers was Obersturmführer Erwin Bachmann, a young man in his early 20s, serving as adjutant to his battalion commander. The terrain favored defenders, narrow streets, stone houses, and low visibility in the winter fog. It was a place where tanks could become as vulnerable as infantry, where skill and timing meant survival. In mid-January, the Americans moved to relieve their infantry, trapped inside Herrlisheim. The 43rd Tank Battalion of the 12th Armored Division was ordered to attack. The plan was to advance along the eastern approach to the town, link up with friendly units, and break the German hold. What awaited them, however, was a trap. Concealed armor, hidden anti-tank weapons, and the nerve of one determined young officer. As the 43rd Battalion advanced through the fog, their radio communications grew unstable. Tanks entered the village one by one, squeezed between walls and narrow intersections. Infantry support lagged behind. For a while, the American column moved unopposed, until the first shell struck. The lead Sherman was hit and blocked the street. The rest of the formation halted in confusion. Smoke filled the lanes, and no one could see where the fire came from. Reports from survivors describe an atmosphere of chaos. The crack of armor-piercing rounds, the hiss of smoke shells, and the echo of engines reversing into one another. At division headquarters, the last message received from the 43rd was short and broken. We're heavily engaged east of Herrlisheim. After that, nothing. When American reconnaissance planes flew over the area the next morning, they saw the aftermath. Dozens of tanks scattered around the village and its fields, some burned out, others sitting intact but abandoned. Crews had fought to the last or been captured. Entire platoons were missing. Within a single day, the 43rd Tank Battalion had ceased to exist as an organized unit. The fate of these men became a haunting mystery. Few survivors returned, and those who did spoke of disorientation and overwhelming fire from unseen positions. It would take weeks before the full scale of the loss was understood. The U.S. Army had lost more than 20 Shermans in that engagement, with most of their crews either killed or captured. At the heart of the German defense was Erwin Bachmann. He entered Herrlisheim on a motorcycle, reconnoitering the situation himself before bringing in 2 Panther tanks from his battalion's 3rd Company. Those were the only armored vehicles immediately available. Bachmann positioned his Panthers at a crossroads deep within the town, one covering the main street, the other watching the side approach. Visibility was barely 50 meters. Somewhere beyond the fog, American Shermans rumbled forward, unaware that German armor waited in ambush. When the first U.S. tank appeared, a single shot from the lead Panther tore through its front plate. The second Sherman turned its turret, but before it could fire, it was struck from the flank. The confined streets left the American formation trapped. Reversing was impossible, and turning was suicidal. Infantry with Panzerfausts joined in, striking at close range. The two Panthers maneuvered cautiously, switching positions to confuse the attackers. Within hours, the column was shattered. Many American crews surrendered, realizing further resistance was hopeless. According to after-action reports, Bachmann personally organized the capture of dozens of prisoners and the recovery of several Sherman tanks left intact. These vehicles were later towed back for German use. His unit also released a group of German prisoners who had been held by the Americans earlier in the fighting. The two Panthers held their ground until evening, when ammunition ran low. They then withdrew to the northern edge of Herrlisheim, knocking out two more Shermans during the retreat. The audacity of that maneuver, two tanks entering a village held by an entire battalion and emerging victorious, became a rare success story in the closing months of the war. The following days revealed the full cost of the engagement. Herrlisheim lay in ruins, littered with destroyed vehicles and burned houses. The 43rd Tank Battalion had effectively disappeared from the order of battle. Many of its men were later listed as missing or taken prisoner. For the Germans, the action was hailed as an example of decisive local leadership under impossible conditions. Bachmann's cool judgment and tactical improvisation earned him the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in February 1945. His victory, though small in scale, carried symbolic weight, proof at least for propaganda purposes that skill could still offset numbers. Yet the broader campaign told a different story. Operation Nordwind had failed to achieve its strategic goals. The German offensive gradually stalled, exhausted by attrition, cold, and fuel shortages. By mid-February, the Allies had regained control of Herrlisheim and forced the German units back across the Rhine. In retrospect, the battle offered lessons that extended beyond tactics. It showed the fragility of armored warfare in urban terrain, where visibility, communication, and terrain could negate numerical superiority. It also illustrated how individual initiative, from both sides, could determine the fate of hundreds in a single village street. Erwin Bachmann survived the war. Captured by Allied forces later in 1945, he spent time as a prisoner before returning to civilian life. He lived until 2010, rarely speaking publicly about the war. His name, however, remained linked with the story of Herrlisheim, a symbol of courage, skill, and the unpredictability of battle. To historians, his duel with the American tankers remains a fascinating study of leadership and circumstance, rather than heroism in isolation. The mystery of the vanished battalion and the strange calm that followed the fighting still linger as reminders of how history is built from fragments, reports, testimonies, and memories shaped by fog, fear, and time. The encounter between Bachmann's two Panthers and the American Shermans endures not for its scale, but for its human dimension. The tension of decision under uncertainty, the fleeting nature of advantage, and the fragility of life in mechanized war. As the fog lifted over Herrlisheim that winter, the battlefield was silent once more. The snow concealed the wrecks and footprints, and soon the world moved on. Yet the echoes of that short, violent day remain a lesson of judgment, chance, and the cost of every choice made in war. If you liked this story, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss the next historical tale from the past.